pleasure is to introduce Dr. Jürgen Bauhaus, Professor of Silviculture at the University of Freiburg. Dr. Bauhaus is a professor of silviculture at the Faculty of Environment and Natural Resources at Freiburg University in Germany. His research focuses on forest dynamics and the management of forests, particularly structure and composition, the ecological function of biodiversity, including the adaptation of forests to global change. He has published several books and more than 300 peer-reviewed publications. He is also heavily involved in forest policy, where he currently sits on the Scientific Advisory Board on Forest Policy at the German Federal Ministry of Food and Agriculture. In 2014, Jürgen received the Scientific Achievement Award of the International Union of Forest Research Organizations, or IUFRO. And today he'll be speaking on adapting forests to global change, challenges, research, and governance approaches. So join me in welcoming Dr. Jürgen Bauhaus.
Thank you very much for the kind words, Kevin, and more so even for the opportunity to be here and be able to speak to you and hopefully also establish further long-lasting collaboration between your wonderful diverse projects and the project that I will be also talking about. This may not be your sort of normal keynote. It really consists of three different parts that are reflected here in the title. On the one side, we'll talk about the challenges that we face with a focus on Germany and Central Europe to give you an impression of where we stand in relation to this challenge and the issue. Then I will show you an approach that we will adopt to tackle that problem from a scientific perspective, and give an example of what kind of new governance approaches have been implemented in Germany. So that works. Let's start with the adaptation challenge. What we have been seeing in the recent past have been large-scale disturbances in Europe, in many other parts. What the fires have been for you people here in Canada, for us that's been largely the bark beetle outbreaks in Central Europe that mostly affected spruce forests. And these forests are of course not providing a lot of ecosystem services, and they're putting many of our policies, basically put a big question mark behind a lot of our policies. We're greatly failing the targets that are enshrined in legislation, for example, for climate mitigation in the land use change and forestry sector. Now we're failing that to a large extent as a result of these disturbances. The most dramatic years have been 2018 to 2020, where we had consecutive drought years. And in Germany, we basically lost sort of through stand scale disturbances, 500,000 hectares, much more through individual and groups and so on. And this economic damage from that time was 50 billion euros, which is about 10 times the annual net revenue of the forestry sector. To also put that into perspective for you, in Germany, the annual harvest is a bit more than half of what you harvest here in Canada. So tiny country, but intensive forestry. And what we see is that these damages are not only affecting these so-called artificial, semi-natural conifer monocultures, but they're also increasingly affecting our native forests. There were some states where the salvage harvesting of European beech was as high as that of Norway spruce. And the damage is, of course, not only economical, but as you see here with these, I think, probably most important sustainable development goals, namely climate action, clean water, biodiversity, and renewable resources. It's affecting all of these sustainable development goals. So we're living in a time of increasing uncertainty and ambiguity. You know, we have climate change that is affecting us, and we're reasonably good at sort of anticipating the gradual changes that we're facing there, the increase in temperature, CO2 concentrations, and perhaps also the changes in precipitation regimes. What we're not good at is anticipating extremes and disturbances. We do know that they are likely to increase in frequency and intensity, but when they hit and where they hit, we really don't know. And that also is true for this great disturbance that we have experienced in 2018, 2020. We're also experiencing system changes and tipping points. And sometimes it's very little things. You know, these little fungal sporocarps that you see there out of the fungus that causing the ash shoot dieback. We're losing all the ashes in Europe. And it's not the first species that is disappearing. And of course, not only the ecosystems and the environment are changing, we are changing also in our attitudes towards forests, the values we place on them, and in our use of the forests. And I'll give a few examples of these sort of things that we are facing. What you see here is a projection of the climatic water balance. So the balance between all precipitation and evapotranspiration. In the recent past, the current time, 2020 to 2050, and 2017 to 2100. And what you see in the central panel is actually something that we're experiencing already greatly. And when it was extreme, we're already seeing that situation that you see on the right panel. So we have basically, strong negative water balances across Germany. And there are a few islands only where we still have a positive water balance in the future. And so that will, of course, greatly affect our forests. A colleague from Switzerland, from Zurich, Scher, produced this very nice graph showing the annual summer temperatures for 3 different periods, 1864 to 1990, blue, 91 to 2018, red, and 2046 to 75 as a projection according to the RCP 8.5 scenario for the future. And this is for cities in northern Switzerland, so close to where I live now in Freiburg. And you see that for the period until 2018, we already have experienced this increase of 1.5 degrees average annual temperature. And the other thing that you see there are these extreme years that we have experienced in 2003 and 2018, and they are the mean of the future condition. And when I see what these damages have been in 2003 and 2018, I really don't want to see what the extreme conditions will be for this future distribution of summer temperatures. And I really wonder that there's still so many people out there that think that, if we just leave forests alone, that will be okay. That will be the best way to adapt our forests. We see already so many species that cannot cope with these conditions that we're facing under extremes today. And the damage has been great, been nicely shown by colleagues Cornelius Senf and Rupert Seidel from Munich. What you see here are these maps of Europe, and they show the increase in disturbance. And what you see in dark red is basically an increase in the disturbance intensity in terms of scale of 500% over these years, 2018 and 2020. And there's been a close relationship between these disturbances and summer drought. So drought is really one big issue, but it's not the only one. And some of the problems are, of course, also made by ourselves. In this synthesis study that colleagues mostly from Italy did on factors that predispose our forests to disturbances, you see that they have looked at 3 different categories of factors: climatic, landscape factors, the blue, and then factors that are inherent to forests, the green. And you see that for the 3 different types of disturbances: fire, wind throw, and insects. And interestingly, when you look at which are the forest-related factors that explain most of the vulnerability of forests to disturbance, it's biomass and stand density for fire, it's tree age and biomass, and it's leaf area index, here the more open forests, and biomass for insect damage. So it also shows what conflict we have here in terms of strategies, because if you look at this and think about adaptation, then you wonder whether storing more and more carbon in forests for climate mitigation is actually a good idea. Yeah? If you do that in our forests that are already having very high average stocking values, you increase the risk for these disturbances. And Christian already said that it's not just about climate, it's also about other changes that come through global change. I already mentioned this disease that is killing our ash. And these are extremely hard to predict. And the next disease or the next new pest species may come around the corner next week. We really don't know. And this has not only large implications on, say, the trees, which are our foundational species in forests, but also on biodiversity. Many people don't realize that we have these extinction cascades that will be caused by the loss of tree species. For ash alone, people have analyzed that, for example, in Sweden, over 100 species would be threatened with extinction if we lose that species. And this is a process that is not likely to go away, quite to the contrary. Brockerhof and Liebhold sort of put these figures together for introductions of forest insects in the continents: North America, Europe, and New Zealand. And you see that, everyone who's traveled to New Zealand and had to show the underside of their shoes to see whether there was any dirt in there, and had to empty their tent to see whether any seeds still stuck to the bottom of the tent, know that New Zealand is extremely strict. And even they can't prevent these kind of introductions. And what you see there is North America and Europe even more are particularly poor at this through our trade. And the consequences of this are quite often devastating. A few years ago, I spent a holiday in southern Italy. It's so heartbreaking to see that basically entire landscapes, where olive trees are dying back, are changing, cultural landscapes that are thousands of years old through the introduction of a bacterium with ornamental plants from Central America. Last week, I was in the US, where people observing the spread of the new beech leaf disease, not beech bark disease, which comes on top of the beech bark disease that is already there, and increasing mortality of beech trees dramatically. And again, when you see this, and I see the discussions that we have at home, where people, for example, push for very natural, monodominant European beech forests, I wonder whether sort of these threats are really not sinking in enough into our thinking. There are few, and these are of course difficult, projections how this may continue. The study here by Sebens on 7 taxonomic groups. I've picked only vascular plants and arthropods. And you see there's a prediction of that development till 2050. And you see again, it's Europe and North America that are particularly affected or are likely particularly affected by these developments. So we have to be prepared for that. And we need to be prepared for the societal changes that stem from urbanization, the globalization of trade. We've just seen that, but also energy transitions and the development of new materials, and also changing attitudes and expectations regarding nature's services to humans. So I couldn't find a translation here for this picture. That one here. I took that in the Harz Mountains. In this picture that I showed in the beginning of this landscape, mountainous landscapes with all the spruce disappeared, that was from the Harz Mountains. And if you turned around from that sign, you saw this scene to the left there. So these are actually citizens that say, we mourn the loss of our forests. And then they list all the ecosystem services they had gained from the forests that are actually gone. And what's more, or what these things indicate to us is we basically will face in the long term, already do, but also in the long term, an absence of stable states. So in the past, in terms of forestry, also the forestry that I learned as a student, we planned from a starting point to a future desired condition in a deterministic way. I think most of you realize that that is basically not possible anymore. We may sort of define desirable landscapes where we may want to end up, and they can be also perhaps described through the undesirable conditions around these landscapes, but we don't know whether the one way will take us there. We have to develop several options because we really don't know which ones will be successful. What we see is that in many cases, no action is probably not sufficient. We just completed a survey of professionals and forest owners in Europe, and the very, very large proportion realize that and say that no action is not an option for them. And we need to continue doing that. It's not something that we do once, but we have to basically reassess, similar to the antivirus program on your computer. You don't run it today and hope that it will last for the next 3 years, but it needs to be updated. And so we need to update these options. And the only way we can do that is, of course, through continuous research. And we will have to concede that, many times we will fail. We have to be prepared also that large investments will fail. An example here close to my hometown Freiburg, in the Upper Rhine Valley, where we have had large forests of pine, and people have realized that 50, 60 years ago, that they are not the forests of the future, and they started to convert them, to underplant them with European beech, with oaks, and so on. And now the pines are dying as a result of multiple causes: drought, heat, biotic factors. The beech is dying, the oaks are not looking very good. The only thing that's still looking reasonably good is American red oak. It's Robinia and black cherry, some of which are considered invasive. And we have to ask ourselves, can we actually afford to put these species into this ugly invasive bucket of species that we don't want, or are we actually reliant on these species to maintain future forest conditions? And that brings me to this question that stands at the center of this research effort that I want to say a few words about: future forests. How do we derive decision options for such complex adaptive systems? Decisions that we need to take today that last ideally sometimes 100 years or more. And this is a question that brought the people in Future Forests together. So I'll say a few words about this approach. Future Forests is a cluster of excellence that will start beginning of next year in January. And it is the first time that forest sciences have been permitted to play Champions League in Germany. These clusters of excellences are very large programs that are meant to shape the research foci of universities. So it's a 7-year project with 54 million euros with the option to extend that if we are successful for another 7 years. And the sort of framework or some of the important concepts that we want to apply here in Future Forests that we think are necessary is first of all that we see these adaptation challenges as an issue that we have to understand in the context of social ecological systems. So we have basically the ecosystem and its capacity to provide us with ecosystem services on the one side, and on the other side, the social sphere, where there are demands on these ecosystem services by society. And where they overlap, we hopefully have sustainable forest systems. And both the environmental changes that I've just mentioned, as well as the societal changes, are shaping this overlap. And in my view of sort of forestry and the changes that we have seen in recent years, my impression is that this area of overlap is as small as I've ever seen it. Changes to the system can occur at any place and basically sort of then cascading through the system. So biotic structures or assemblages, for example, through the introduction of non-native tree species, they may cascade throughout the system, or societal values. And there are governance feedbacks that then might bring it back to the other sphere in these systems. Risks, as I've just said, tend to decrease that area of overlap. Adaptation may help us to maintain these systems functioning, and transformation, where we will probably experience stronger changes to the system, might actually bring this area of overlap more together. One important concept that we will follow in Future Forests is that of what we call adaptation and transformation pathways. So these adaptation and transformation pathways, they also depend on scenarios, as you know them, the IPCC scenarios or socioeconomic scenarios, and we will develop them too. But we don't want to end up there, because the scenarios are usually sort of an integrated depiction of a lot of assumptions over time. On the one side, what we will be looking at is to define the space, the sustainability space for these scenarios. And for that, we have, of course, biophysical boundaries, where some systems may not be functioning anymore. But we also have normative boundaries. And I think, unique thing that we want to bring to this kind of scenario and modeling development in Future Forests is that we want to make decisions explicit. And every yellow point that you see here in this slide is basically what we call a decision node, where certain trajectories along scenarios can be changed. And these may be normative boundaries that are congruent or incongruent also with the biophysical boundaries. And if you put them together, our sort of conceptual depiction of these adaptation and transformation pathways looks something like that, where you have these spaghettis. There have been many words for this kind of graph here. The less nice ones were colonoscopy and so on. What this is meant to show is, you know, there will be, of course, many possible futures. And this kind of approach may also allow us to look backward from, say, normative goals of transformation pathways that we can develop from discussions with society to see which options do you actually need to take, yeah, to get there, and which options, you know, may bring us further away. So we will tackle these questions with a wide range of adaptation challenges. We'll start close to our home in the Black Forest and the Rhine Valley, where we have distinctly different challenges. On the one side, in the Rhine Valley, where we may lose forests as such, so where the existence of forests is threatened, and you know, if they disappear, we may develop something like Mediterranean bushland. Yeah? Whereas in the Black Forest, the issue is probably more that the forest will undergo dramatic changes in, you know, composition, away from a conifer-dominated and, you know, economically also very viable forest to one that is more dominated by broadleafs, yeah, which has strong implications for industry. So here in the Rhine Valley, we have a situation already where in many places we cannot establish forests anymore without irrigation, something I've never dreamt of when I was a forestry student. And here the situation in the Black Forest is more a question of, you know, what will come next in terms of composition. I will say a few words about this multi-scaled approach in a minute. But we don't want to stay there. We basically argue that we want to start regionally because we have the best databases there, very good networks also into society and forest practices. And here we want to develop a kind of proof of concept for this research approach that we follow. But at the same time, see, because of the global relevance of this research, want to develop international collaborations with partners that have similar research questions to join forces. And that's the reason why I'm also here. So the goals of future forests are to unravel the social and ecological system properties and mechanisms that actually provide adaptive capacity of these systems, to gain an in-depth understanding of the challenges in decision-making under deep uncertainty and ambiguity, to identify viable adaptation and transformation pathways towards resilient forest socio-ecological systems, and last but not least, to develop and assess innovative adaptive governance approaches. So basically this cluster has these three research areas. A, that focuses on risks to ecosystems and adaptation options. B, which is grounded in social sciences on decision-making for future forests. And C, which brings these spheres together on the development of this adaptation and transformation pathway for novel socio-ecological systems. And of course, there are a number of sort of support infrastructures, a graduate academy, and an international forest adaptation lab, which I will be saying a few more words about later. So research area A, we basically look at ecosystems, at complex adaptive ecosystems, and want to understand these properties of complex adaptive systems that convey resilience and adaptive capacity under the influence of environmental and social drivers. And on the one side, we will study the controls, so climatic and microclimatic effects, the response at the level of disturbances, biotic and abiotic, largely with a focus on drought and mortality, and the impact of these on biodiversity, as well as on other ecosystem services such as human health. So this is a quite novel component that we really have a strong focus on the human health services of forests. Let me skip that in the sake of time. Research area B is not a full-blown assessment of the whole socioeconomic system. We cannot afford that, and we don't have the capacity to do all of that. Here, the focus is really on the question of decision-making, and the decision-making basically of all actors at different level of governance. Yeah, so from scientists to policymakers, NGOs, and so on and so forth. And the goal of this is to basically develop a better theory on decision-making in socio-ecological contexts, and to conduct well-coordinated case studies to see how people actually do make these decisions in these extremely difficult contexts. So it's divided in a number of themes. One is the evidentiary basis for decision-making, which is, of course, deteriorating rapidly because all the experiential knowledge is devalued. And what can we put in place of evidence-based decisions? You know, to what extent are ethical or justice questions important for future forests? And also, of course, how do people actually make decisions in real-life situations? We have a few anthropologists on board who look at that. And the idea is here really to go beyond a traditional, strict, rational planning approach model for these questions. Research area C, and I'm showing you these because I'm hoping that some of these things will trigger interest in some of you for future collaboration. We'll first of all look at a sort of comprehensive framework for SES research for future forests, develop these regionalized scenarios, and a lot of that will be done in co-creation with people who live in these regions and who manage forests in these regions. We don't intend to develop a huge dinosaur model that captures all that, but a model framework where all these different models like forest growth, hydrology, agent-based models for actor decisions and so on can be actually integrated. And in the end, test holistic governance approaches also with these decision makers, where they can explore with these tools how their hypothetical decisions end up and what consequences they have for the system. And I want to point out this International Forest Adaptation Lab. This is a map that basically depicts all the collaborations that we have from Freiburg in the area of forest sciences. It would be nice to bring them all on board, but I don't think that that will be possible. But we have already formed a kind of coalition of the willing, and we hope to basically find partners that follow similar research questions on adaptation challenges of forests, and through the International Forest Adaptation Lab, where we can offer basic resources for joint synthesis work, conceptual work, joint summer schools, etc., to bring people together. I also forget the clicking here sometimes. And the last part of my talk, I want to give you an example of sort of new governance approaches that we have adopted here in Germany. Kevin mentioned my role here in this Forest Policy Scientific Advisory Board, and it's largely a result of that. So one of the questions I think we need to ask is certainly what capacities do many forest owners actually have to adapt forests? And this is a question that's particularly relevant in the European context where we have so many small forest owners that have managed their forests so far really on experiential knowledge. And you've seen how quickly that will change. And the other big issue is here that at the moment, and these are here not the very small forest owners, but sort of medium size, greater than 200 hectares, what you see, more than 90% of all the income from forestry is from the harvesting and sale of timber. Yeah, other income sources are almost negligible. And what we will see as a result of the changes that we've looked at before is that there will be more frequent disturbances, meaning less utilizable timber. We will see market distortions and increasing costs for a lot of activities such as harvesting, regeneration. There'll be loss of assets for these people and also reduced productivity. So in the last 10-year period that we have looked at in the National Forest Inventory, productivity has declined in German forests by 17% within 10 years. There will also be a shift to less productive species, so away from productive conifers to less productive hardwoods. And then it's not surprising that forest owners scratch their head how they can face these increasing costs for regeneration, protection, tending and harvesting, and so on. And as I mentioned, the landscape in Europe looks like this. All these dark colors are private forest owners. These are two examples here from Sweden and Italy, but it looks similar in most sort of Mediterranean and Western European countries, a bit similar a bit different in Eastern European countries. So how do we make sure that forest owners will actually be able to provide all these ecosystem services that we want from them? And rewarding forest owners for ecosystem services has been in the discussion for decades. Yeah, and nothing has happened. And one important reason why nothing has happened is because we haven't figured out how we can quantify them all in a very cost-efficient way. If you want to have a basically monitoring scheme for all these different ecosystem services, the money that's in the system to possibly pay for ecosystem services will be completely eaten up by the resources that are required for the monitoring. And what we have argued as the Scientific Advisory Board is that, first of all, there is a justification to award forest owners for this, particularly for the climate mitigation benefits and also the biodiversity conservation benefits, because our governments have signed these international agreements on that to achieve these targets. But these forest owners have never been asked, but they have to come on board because otherwise these targets will not be achieved. And what we have argued here is that instead of rewarding all these different ecosystem services, we may actually reward them for maintaining their forests in a resilient and adaptive condition, because that is a precondition for all future ecosystem services provision. And this argument has been sort of successfully communicated. We have now a program which is called the Climate Adaptive Forest Management, where non-state forest owners are being supported up to 100 euros per hectare a year if they meet 11 criteria, which I will show you in a moment. It's a 900 million euro program for 5 years, and it's been fully subscribed. It covers so far only roughly a quarter of the area of non-state forests, but the uptake has really been surprisingly positive. So no more forest owners can actually at the moment enter this program. And the other smart move here has been, because it's the first program that's been actually rolled out in this way by the federal government, not through the states, that the federal government employed the sustainability certification schemes, FSC and PFC, to basically control and audit and the compliance with this program, so at very low cost. These are some of the indicators, or these are the indicators that forest owners have to meet. And the blue box Other indicators that I've grouped really have to do with adaptation. And the green box are indicators that have come in through negotiation between the Ministry of Agriculture and the Ministry of Environment. So more biodiversity indicators. And of course, some of them you can argue really what their benefit may be for the adaptation question and the adaptation challenge. But I think that, if we are successful in future forests, we have a great potential to revise this, also analyze the effectiveness of this, etc. Let me come back to this question that we've put up. How do we really derive decision about robust decisions about the future of such complex systems? I hope I've been able to show you that the challenge is really enormous. And Christian mentioned his idea for a Marshall Plan. Yeah, it really needs nothing less than that because the challenge is so enormous. And I think we also need to be humble that our understanding of the system is really incomplete. Yeah, and that also challenges us in our position as scientists or practitioners who are often being regarded as the experts that can give advice, because quite often, the basis on which we can give advice is not that solid anymore, or maybe hasn't been in the past either. But I think it's important to acknowledge that. And because the challenge is so big, I think we really need to have also this concerted, collaborative efforts, nationally as well as internationally. We need to bring the natural and the social sciences together, because only then can we really understand these socio-ecological systems. And we need to make sure that, say, the work that some ecologists are doing or social scientists is actually done in a way that it can be incorporated in models and scenarios, so that it is driven by these tools. And I think that, or hope really, that with future forests, and I hope that you with Diverse, we can really take a few steps in that direction. Thank you very much.
I think we have, so we're supposed to be on break at 10:10, but we have time for questions. Back.
Great talk, inspiring to hear this, and very impressive what both Future Forests is about and the ancillary and much larger government programs to actually work with local owners. My question, you brought it up at the very end there, is like the scale of Future Forests is enormous, like 7 or 8 times the size of Diverse. What mechanisms have you creatively put in place to try to achieve what you talked about at the end of actually not having 37 or 77 kind of discrete fragmented projects, but that making sure those projects thread together to accomplish the goals you so articulately put out there?
The development of the proposal took us 4 years. Yeah. And I think the 4 years wouldn't have been enough really to forge an interdisciplinary team. I think we started probably 13 years ago when we reshaped our faculty and done away with hierarchies in that faculty, created joint teaching programs where ecologists and social scientists teach the same course together. And we deliberately build up the social sciences of the environment and build up that competence within the faculty. So I think this is the only really interdisciplinary cluster that has been funded ever, in between social and ecological sciences by the German Science Foundation. And I don't think we would have succeeded if we had only the 4 years to actually come together, speak the same language, understand the other disciplines, and generate a willingness to change your own discipline, to also consider variables and inputs from the other disciplines. I hope that answered your question, Peter.
Well, it actually doesn't say how you doesn't tell. It talks about why you're confident you can do this. You didn't actually say what the mechanisms were to make sure it would happen. Other than that, building this network will make it work better.
Yeah.
So.
Well, now we have, of course, large carrots, in front of everyone, and hopefully also governance structures that help us to facilitate that. There's a question here.
Amazing talk. Thank you so much. A lot of similarity with diverse, and also in Canada we had another network on ecosystem services and the monitoring and the modeling of it. So I think in this other network we were interested a lot about the social component. And the thing we face is that after 5 years, we finally knew what should be done, but we lack the funding. So you seem to say that this is 7 year with the possibility of another 7 years. So I think it's a long journey to have all those scientists talking to each other, and the forest is changing faster than you can monitor it. So have you heard of the new ways of saying we don't want to mimic the natural range of natural variability, but the RAD? So you want to redirect, we want to accept and create some kind of new forest. So that's kind of the new way of thinking, that we need to see different pathways. Yeah, as you were suggesting.
Yeah, and I think we often talk about novel ecosystems. In most situations, we are already in these novel ecosystems. So it's not something that we actually create. We have created them already, voluntary and involuntary. And of course, there will be more transformations to be seen.
Right. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Very inspiring. Now, to forest out there, any human interference are disturbances. For us, we have the knowledge, we have the background, we have the expertise to tell which activities are good, which are bad. But to the general public, how we may, convince them that some of the things we do are good for the trees, for the forest, but the others are bad. The line where we will cut the line, between those two sides. You comment.
Well, as I said, for many of the adaptation options, and I'm talking about those now, some of them, we know that they're basically a no regret option. Like increasing diversity, for example, structural and species diversity. If you don't include invasive species in the process. For others, we're not so sure anymore. And I think we have to be open about that. For example, when we look at thinning, I've done a lot of work on thinning. And what we see is that if we do that in young forests early on, that forests usually benefit from it. That the vitality is increased and so on and so forth. But, there's increasing evidence that for stand density management in later ages, taller, older trees, that the negative effects of this, I wouldn't call it thinning anymore as such, but stand density regulation outweigh the positive effects, because these taller trees sort of experience so much transpiration stress that mortality increases. And this is also what the public see. And forestry has also been blamed for many of the problems and the sort of dying trees that we see in Germany. And I think we have to be open that some of the things that we have done in the past and thought that were right are really not right in the future anymore. We have to find new solutions. When I'm teaching my silviculture class here, I'm basically, for every topic that we go through, I ask my students, and so what do we have to do different now? And as for the issue on how do we communicate with the general public about good things and bad things, well, I think we first of all have to hear from them what they really think that is bad, and then we can address these questions. It's also something that we want to do in Future Forests, to have these debates that are inspired by questions from the public, where we don't determine what the important questions are.
In history, we have seen the Earth, over a billion years. We have seen Earth have undergone some disastrous events, but again, we see they can recover, and they're getting better actually. Before human appeared, actually diversity increase. That's just the evidence. That's the truth.
Yeah, but my experience is that a person that sees the trees in the forest outside their backyard being removed is not so receptive to paleoecological arguments.
Maybe time for one more, Solange.
Thanks very much for your question. I'm a forester turned sociologist and doing research on social aspects. So a lot of it resonated with me. And I think one question I would like you to talk is about, since you embark on that journey, have you feel that you are been able to build trust with the different group you're engaging? Because I think that's a real critical issue for a lot of things we're trying to change in forestry.
I think so. We're at the beginning of the journey, yeah. But when I see who's lined up as partners for this, from national parks to IKEA, yeah, they want to work with us. So I hope we can maintain that breadth. But ask me again in 7 years' time.
I think with that, we'll once again thank you, Jürgen, for a fantastic keynote talk. Thank you very much.